The cameras at the joint security area did not blink, yet the man in the footage vanished between frames. 1 second, his body bent forward in a sprint across the DMZ. The next, static, then nothing. The record resumes only after his capture. The missing 5 seconds remain unexplained. I found it years later. On an unmarked tape, filed under routine border surveillance, 11/23/1984. But the record wasn't routine, because the man wasn't just another soldier. He was a defector, one of the rarest kinds, and his body was never listed among the dead or the returned. His name was erased before it was spoken. It began with the box, gray cardboard, brittle at the edges, stored deep in the National Archives Annex, a place where the air is always too dry, the light always too pale. I wasn't supposed to be there. A mislabeling, that's what the clerk called it. The barcode on the outside of the box belonged to agricultural reports. But inside were reels of half-burned photographs, tapes with handwritten labels, and memos stamped with words no one was meant to read. One stood out. Document fragment. Transcript, November 23, 1984. Joint Security Area Firefight. Subject, unidentified escape attempt. Casualties, 1 KIA, DPRK, 3 WIA, UN. Defector status, redacted. I remembered the official story. It was called the 1984 JSA shootout. A Soviet citizen stationed with the North Koreans ran across the border during a routine tour. Gunfire erupted. People died. But the narrative ended neatly. The man lived. The incident passed. History moved forward. Yet this file suggested otherwise. The pages spoke of a second figure, another man who wasn't supposed to be there. One never acknowledged. And then there was the tape. A simple cassette. Faded label. Monarchs 07B. The word Monarch did not appear anywhere else in the box. I placed it into the player and a voice began to bleed through the static. The voice said, "Interview. Subject 0461. Audio partially redacted." Q. What did you see? A. He was already running before the others noticed. He wasn't one of us. He wasn't Soviet either. Q. Then who? A. I don't know. He crossed the line and the film cut out. When it returned, he was gone. Memory retention beyond protocol thresholds. 3x wiped. The tape ended abruptly. I rewound it 3 times. Each time the words slipped further into static, as though the act of listening dissolved the record. I filed a request for supporting documents. The request returned blank. Every entry tied to Monarch was tagged with one phrase. No room 93 at Langley. Disregard footage. But I had seen it. The cut in the tape. The body mid-run, then erased. The more I searched, the more I found the same anomalies repeating. Official records of the 1984 shootout always spoke of one defector, Vasily Yakovlevich Matuzok, a Soviet embassy worker stationed in Pyongyang who made his escape under fire. That was the public record. Declassified, confirmed, settled. But scattered across misfiled archives, the margins told a different story. One memo listed casualties as 5. Total, though only 4 were ever admitted. Another claimed the firefight lasted 40 minutes, while every news report declared it ended in 10. And the photographs, faces blurred not by censorship, but as if the film itself had been warped at the moment of capture. Real project. Cross-reference, MK Ultra Subproject 130. Visual field distortion during stress induction. What did it mean for a border shootout in Korea? Why would a defector's escape be linked, even in a margin, to the language of psychological operations? I began mapping the accounts side by side. The Soviet defected. Gunfire erupted. North Korean. Guards pursued. American and South Korean soldiers returned fire. That was the spine. But on every retelling, details shifted. The location of bodies, the length of the pursuit, the number of voices heard on the radio. The footage confirmed it. Frames were missing, not spliced, not censored, missing. Time itself skipped forward. And in that interval, the second man disappeared. Witness statements whispered the same thing. A soldier without insignia, a body running parallel to Matuzak, then gone. But no file ever admitted his existence. I returned to the tape. This time, I let it play in silence after the static ended. Minutes passed. Then a faint clicking like reels turning on an empty machine, and beneath it, breath. Shallow, human, present, not erased, not yet. The catalog number read, Monarch. The archives insisted no such project existed, but those who study the shadows know otherwise. Monarch was the whispered extension of MK-Ultra, not official, not proven, but spoken of in the corridors of erased memory. A program tied to trauma, control, the bending of perception. What was it doing at the Korean border? The firefight itself became less important than the silence surrounding it. Why did the DPRK never acknowledge the missing? Why did the US redact not only names, but entire minutes of time? Why did the Soviet Union release no record of Matuzak's debriefing? 3. Nations, each sworn enemies yet each in agreement. Something must be buried, and buried it was. Until the misfiled box surfaced, until the tape crackled, until the breath on the reel reminded me, the erased are never truly gone. The last page of the folder bore only one line, handwritten. He never reached the South. Film cut. Body unaccounted. 4. Do not pursue. Yet the official record insists he lived, welcomed, interviewed. A survivor. 2 stories. Both sealed. Both true. Which one survives depends only on who is left to remember. They called it a border incident. That was the phrase in the cables, in the morning briefings, in the press releases. But borders don't erase 5 seconds of film. Borders don't split a man into 2 narratives, one alive, one vanished. That was something else, something designed. The first collapse was the record itself. The more I traced the documents, the more the story began to fold in on itself. At the Library of Congress, the file catalog referred me to an Army index, which then pointed me to the CIA reading room, which then redirected me to the National Security Archive. Each reference cited another. Each archive referenced a box that no longer existed. I counted 12 redirects before the trail circled back to the first shelf. The file system was a Mobius strip. At the center of it was always the same phrase. Monarch, do not circulate. Document fragment recovered, 11/23/1984, interview with WIA redacted. Subject reports visual doubling. Notes, subject recalls seeing 2 defectors, 1 Soviet, 1 unmarked. Follow-up, memory inconsistent, requires stabilization. Action, erase, memory stabilization. That phrase belonged not to battlefield reports but to psychiatric protocols. I searched the medical archives. Buried among MK-Ultra documents, I found a reference to Subproject 98, induced amnesia via stress plus trauma loops. Volunteers, or subjects, were placed in high-pressure simulations, their memory recorded, fragmented, then erased. The parallels to the JSA incident were clear. Stress, gunfire, memory collapse, witnesses recalling fragments inconsistent with the record, and always, the order to erase. At Fort Meade, I requested access to NSA listening logs from November 1984. There were supposed to be complete radio captures of every transmission across the DMZ. Instead, there was silence. 27 minutes, missing from the archive. Not corrupted, not degraded, deleted. The archivist shrugged. Routine purge, he said. Back then, storage was expensive, but the metadata told a different story. The gap was intentional, tagged with a classification code I had only seen once before. Room 641A, that was San Francisco. The AT&T building where the NSA built a windowless room to siphon global internet traffic. But the date was wrong. Room 641A wasn't built until 2003. Why would a 1984 Korean firefight be tagged with a room that wouldn't exist for another 20 years? The record was collapsing into paradox. I traced interviews with American soldiers who were there. Most refused to speak. One agreed, under the condition his name never surface. He said, "There were two of them. Everyone knew it. One was Russian. That was the story. The other, no flag, no name, he was faster, crossed first, disappeared before anyone got him. We were told to never mention him again. When the paperwork came, his name wasn't there. Not redacted, gone, as if he never existed. But traces remained. A photograph published briefly in South Korean newspapers the day after the incident showed Matuzak being pulled to safety. But in the background, half blurred by motion, another figure was visible. Running, leaning forward, arms outstretched. When the story was reissued by international wires, the photograph was cropped, the second body excised. Document fragment, South Korean Army log. Casualty list notes, DPRK pursuit unit reported firing on two fleeing figures, one captured, one unaccounted. Command response, remove second reference before transmission. The institution collapsed under its own silence. The U.S. claimed only one defector. The DPRK admitted none. The Soviet Union celebrated its rescued citizen, but never once released his testimony. Three nations, enemies in every sense, yet united in the decision to erase one body from history. What power did that body hold? What risk did his existence represent? The Monarch tape continued to haunt me. I digitized the reel. Every attempt to clean the audio revealed layers beneath the static. At first, the voice, then the breathing, and then faint mechanical tones, like a number station coded into the silence. The spectrogram showed bursts of energy at exact intervals, 4.6 seconds apart. Always the same gap, 0.6 seconds, the length of the missing footage. The tones, mapped onto coordinates. When plotted, they pointed not to Korea, not to Langley, but to the Nevada desert. Location injection, coordinates match Groom Lake Facility, Area 51. Why would a Korean border firefight be tied to a desert base? Halfway across the world, the only answer that returned in the files was a single line. Project Monarch testing confirmed, relocation required, collapse of witness. The most harrowing collapse was not the records, it was the men who remembered. One soldier, interviewed, in 1985, spoke clearly of two defectors. By 1987, his testimony changed. He now remembered only one. By 1991, he denied being present at all. Each interview shifted further from the original. The human record rewritten in real time. I tracked him down decades later. He stared at me for a long time before speaking. Sometimes I dream about him. The second one. I see him crossing, but when I wake up, I'm told it never happened. How? Do you know what's real when your memories don't hold? His voice broke. He confessed he had undergone memory treatments after leaving service. Treatments designed to stabilize trauma. He could no longer tell whether his recollections belonged to him or to the program. Real project injection, CIA document, 140394, post-event memory consolidation via electroconvulsive reinforcement, applications, denial of incident, witness compliance. The collapse was systemic, not just the archive, not just the footage, but the minds of the men who were there, their memories bent, reframed, erased, until only one narrative survived. The final folder in the box contained a blueprint, Langley, Headquarters 1980 revision. Every room numbered, every corridor drawn. But one door had no designation, a sealed chamber in the basement. Its note read only, Room 93, Monarch. The archivists insisted no such room ever existed. But the blueprint was authentic, and beneath it, in handwriting that matched the first memo, subject never reached the South. He reached room 93. The blueprint lay flat before me. Langley headquarters, sketched in careful lines, every corridor accounted for, every office numbered, except one. A door without a name. A chamber marked only room 93. They said it never existed. But the tape, the breath, the erased seconds, they all pointed here. I followed the coordinates. Nevada, Langley, Korea. 3 points of a triangle drawn across the erased body. At Groom Lake, files showed experiments on sensory disruption under duress. At Langley, Monarch appeared in budget requests, always buried beneath legitimate programs. At the DMZ, footage dissolved time itself. Not supernatural, not divine, just human design, pushed too far into silence. Monarch directive: integrate field trial into live incident. Test parameters: multiple witnesses, high stress, controlled erasure outcome, successful, 4.66 gap. Collateral casualties: acceptable. The 1984 firefight was not just an escape attempt. It was a stage. The chaos of gunfire masked something else, a live trial of psychological erasure. The second body was not meant to escape. He was meant to vanish. A test subject in uniform inserted into history, then removed from it. The Soviets' defection was real. The firefight was real. The blood, the bullets, the dead, all real. But layered into that chaos was an experiment so precise it rewrote the witness record. Memory was the battlefield. The phrase returned again and again. Memory retention beyond protocol thresholds. 3x wiped. The more I read, the more I understood. The second body was not erased because he failed. He was erased because he succeeded. He crossed the line. And for those 4.6 seconds, he existed outside the frame of history. The program's purpose was never to control minds alone. It was to bend the continuity of memory itself. Erase one man from one moment, and you control the story told forever after. The collapse of truth was not accidental. It was managed. South Korea cropped the photograph. The U.S. destroyed the radio tapes. The Soviet Union sealed its debriefing. North Korea buried its casualties, enemies yet complicit, because silence serves all powers equally. Because to admit the second body was to admit the existence of a program that none could acknowledge. NSA Room 641A, cross-reference flagged. To Monarch test record, despite temporal impossibility. This was not a clerical error. It was deliberate, tagging future rooms, future systems, to anchor the record across time. Room 93 in Langley, Room 641A in San Francisco. The same architecture repeated: rooms without doors, records without names, files without subjects. The men who tried to remember collapsed under the weight of silence, their testimonies bent until they denied themselves. What cannot be spoken cannot be proven. What cannot be proven is erased. The institutions did not need to destroy the body. They only needed to erase the witnesses. In the end, the truth was simple. On November 23, 1984, 2 men ran across the DMZ. One survived in the record. One survived only in fragments. He was the body erased. A test subject. A ghost carried forward by static, by breath on tape, by the memory of soldiers who dream but cannot name. Final document fragment. Redacted. Subject 0461 successfully. Removed from collective record. Residual anomalies. Witness dreams. Recurring fragments. Recommendation: continue suppression. Do not pursue. The silence was the victory. The institution's greatest weapon. Not bullets, not prisons, but the slow erasure of a life until nothing remains but rumor. And I understood then why the tape had surfaced. Not to reveal, but to test the erasure once more. To measure whether, decades later, someone might still chase the missing seconds. The box was never misfiled. It was placed, to see if silence still held. I listened again to the cassette. The static roared, the voice fractured. And then, beneath it all, a final line I had missed before. This is subject 0461. If you are hearing this, I did cross, but not into your world. Into theirs. Room 93 holds me still. He never reached the south. He never returned to the north. He crossed into a space between frames, between memories, between rooms that officially do not exist. The second body remains there, unacknowledged, unnamed, erased. And yet, every time the footage skips, every time the witness dreams, every time the tape breathes, he is present. History is not the story of what happened. It is the story of what is allowed to remain. And in that silence, the erased live on. The archive is closed now, the file resealed, the box returned, the room denied. Nothing more to pursue, nothing more to remember. Only silence.